There you go. Take a nap this afternoon.
Not that I should have. I think if I take a nap, it's because I have not had 8 hours of rest. I just determined last year. Thank you. That if I didn't do it for myself, nobody else would. So I make sure I get 8 hours of rest.
True of a many things.
You've been traveling, or you've been here? Happened since Christmas anyway. Okay.
She went to Alaska. She spent Christmas in Alaska.
Cold. I didn't know before we even got in here. I heard about that. Like you could see on the drive here, you could just see that how much it hurt trees. We're seeing it because it looked kind of,
like an apocalypse.
Kind of. So, of course, Mississippi is not as pretty. It's almost like just an imaginary line where Mississippi, and then you get over the line and Tennessee is just prettier. I mean, it's just prettier. Where's Jackson? Is she teaching?
She's teaching the babies.
Okay.
Trying to. Lead us in prayer in the morning. John, would you lead us in prayer in the morning? All right, it's time for us to begin this evening. We have distinguished guests and the kings with us, so be sure you speak to them. We're in 2 Chronicles. We'll be starting in chapter 29 this evening and lesson 17 in our workbook. And as I've commented before, after tonight we'll have lesson 18 on Sunday, and then the class will end next Wednesday. Gary's going to do a review of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. A thorough review, right, Gary?
Thorough. We're going to read every verse.
Every verse. There you go. It'll take more than one class. Okay, well, that's good. Practice your Hebrew names. That's right. All right, we're going to start with a prayer, and John's going to lead us in the prayer.
Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful you've given us another day of life and another opportunity to come together and study and learn more about you this evening. We ask your blessings, Heavenly Father, upon us as we study. Open our minds and hearts to your word and find ways that we can apply the Old Testament to our lives today. Be with all those that are unable to attend this evening and help them with whatever barrier prevents them from being here. Be with those that are choosing not to be here this evening, Heavenly Father, help them break their hearts. That they might want to learn more about you and assemble with us. We ask your blessings upon this local church and all those that attend here, and be with John as he's prepared for this class. Give him a good memory of the material and help him lead us in the way you'd have him to do so. In Christ's name we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, John. All right. As usual, I try to sort of set the context of where we are. 2 Chronicles, first 9 chapters of 2 Chronicles is on the reign of Solomon. And then the other 27 chapters covers the reign of 19 kings and 1 queen. So far, we have studied 11 kings and the 1 queen. How many of those were good kings, do you think? Well, more than 3. About 7 were mostly good, okay? But it's going to go downhill from here because tonight we'll study a good king, spoiler alert. But then on Sunday, there are 7 kings in Sunday's lesson. Only one of those is what we would call a good king. So it's going to go downhill. The general trajectory of Judah is downhill. Not as fast as Israel, but the general trajectory is downhill. But today we'll study Hezekiah. Hezekiah became king at age 25, and he reigned 29 years, good or bad, smiley or frowny. He's a good king. He's a good king. As a matter of fact, question 2 in our book says, how did the chronicler characterize his reign? From verse 2 of chapter 29.
Did what was right.
He did what was right and was compared to whom? To David. High praise. Only 3 of the kings of Judah were compared to David. Some of the kings say he did good like his father, or he did good like so-and-so. But only 3 of the kings are compared to David, and that's Jehoshaphat, whom we've already studied, Hezekiah, and Josiah, who is one of the kings we'll look at on Sunday, are the only 3 that the chronicler says they did good like David. So these were very good kings, but there weren't enough of them, is the problem. There just weren't enough of them. One of the first things that Hezekiah did was repair the temple. Look at question 3. What was the condition of the temple when he became king? Sorry? Bad repair. Not only that, his father Ahaz had closed the doors of the temple. So he'd shut the temple up, and he'd cut up some of the vessels. So one of the first things that Hezekiah tried to do was restore that. Why did he want to do that?
So they could worship.
You have to reinstitute or reconstitute the worship of God, because the temple was a central part of the worship of God in the nation of Israel and Judah. And then look at question 5. What had to be done to reinstitute worship?
Remove all the filth and consecrate the Levites.
It had to be consecrated, cleansed. To the temple itself had been shut up, had need to be cleaned out. The priests and Levites had probably gone back to working the land, so they had to reconsecrate themselves too. And so Hezekiah ordered that and provided for that. And then question 6, what impact did Judah's forsaking God have on it as a nation?
Lord was angry.
Yeah, there's an old saying that God doesn't pay weekly, but he pays in the end. And that's what was going to happen with Judah, is that they had not obeyed or worshiped God and were going to be punished for that.
It also said they were made an object of scorn.
Object of scorn.
And so the other countries looked down on them.
Yeah, and again, this is a nation that at one time had been sort of the apple of God's eye. They were powerful. They extended their borders under David and then under Solomon. As far as the kingdom could be extended, they had subjected the peoples around them and were paying tribute. But now they're in a much sadder state of affairs. And that's because they were disobeying God. And then question 8, how did Hezekiah re-inaugurate, I wonder if that's really a word, the worship at the temple?
Well, after everything was cleaned up, he offered sacrifices again, burnt offerings, and there was
He
sounded.
he gathered all of his officials. He brought sacrifices and provided those, as did some of the leaders of the people, and had a big celebration, basically. and reinstituted the worship at the temple. And so the temple again became a central part of the worship in the nation of Judah, in the southern kingdom. He also, interestingly enough, reached out to Israel, the northern kingdom, and basically invited them to come and worship at the temple. So question 11 says, what circumstances in Israel might cause her people to be receptive to Hezekiah's invitation to join in observing the Passover? How are things going in Israel? Yeah, this was in the first year of Hezekiah, and Israel was taken by Assyria in the 6th year of Hezekiah. So basically, the nation of Israel is on life support and has 5 years to live from this point. But Hezekiah reaches out to them. They had strayed very far from God, beginning with Jeroboam, who had built the golden calves, and then had had no kings that led revivals in the nation of Israel, so that they had gone farther and farther from God. But the interesting thing is, there were still some people, and we pointed this out on Sunday also, there were some people who still had a heart for God in the northern kingdom. So Hezekiah's invitation, and then question 13 says, how did Israel react to his invitation? What did most people do? Yeah, they laughed and mocked. But some did come. Some did come into Judah to worship at that time. Is God's invitation still handled in the same way today? That many will laugh and mock, but some will come? And isn't that why we continue to try to invite? Because we want to find those with a heart for God who will come, and that's what Hezekiah was trying to do.
It also refers to it as a gladly come.
No.
The word gladly was found there, so I mean that's the desire to worship God.
Yeah, again, a reflection of their heart, wasn't it? That they were happy to do that. The opportunity gave themselves, and they did it. And then once he had cleansed the temple and opened it back up and invited the people from the northern kingdom, he observed the Passover. Question 12 says, why was the feast observed on the 14th day of the 2nd month? When should the Passover feast be observed? The 14th day of the 1st month. And there is a provision in the law, you can read about it over in Deuteronomy, that allowed for people who were not clean to observe it on the 14th of the 2nd month. So apparently the priests and Hezekiah have agreed that that would be best, because there were a lot of people to prepare themselves to worship by observing the Passover. And also the Feast of Passover was a one-day feast, but it was followed by the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread that lasted a week. This was part of what was instituted when the Israelites came out of Egypt, because they were told not to put leaven in their bread, to take it with them, but not to leaven it, because it would then spoil on the way. So the Passover and this week-long feast of unleavened bread. Question 15, why did God accept the worship of those who were ceremonially defiled? Let's read this. Look at chapter 30 and verse 18. It says, for a majority of people, many of them from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves. So these are people from the northern kingdom, from the kingdom of Israel, from the northern tribes. And Therefore, the Levites had to, wait a minute, I got off here. The assembly who had not consecrated. The Levites, I'm in 17, not 18. Yet they ate the Passover otherwise than is described. For Hezekiah had prayed for them, saying, May the good Lord pardon everyone who sets his heart to seek God, the Lord, the God of his fathers, even though not. What do you observe about that? What do you think about that? What was Hezekiah asking God to do?
Cleanse them, or they were ceremonially cleansed.
Yeah. Regard them as clean, even though they weren't, so that they could partake of the Passover. Is that not the same thing we ask for ourselves? Regard us as sinless, even though we aren't. Regard us as innocent, even though we aren't. And, there's a couple other times in the Bible that this comes up. The one that came up in my mind was Naaman. If you remember that when Naaman was cleansed by Elisha, Naaman said, when I go back to, and Naaman was a servant of the Syrian king, when I go back, the king will want to basically hold on to me while he goes into the temple to worship his God. And he says, please forgive me of that. So he didn't want any appearance of worshiping the God of the Syrians. And Elisha basically said, it's okay. God will look at your heart and will determine that, will cleanse you from that. And here we have this similar sort of thing, which I think is very interesting, because that's basically what we want God to do for us.
Now, verse 20 is really nice. It specifically says that the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people.
Yes. Yeah. So, again, he cleansed them, or regarded them as cleansed, even though they weren't, and allowed them to partake. Number 16, why did the Jews extend the celebration for 7 days? Remember Passover, 7 days unleavened bread, and then they wanted to extend it another 7 days, so they spent basically 2 weeks. And why did they do that?
They wanted to worship God.
They were so happy to be worshiping God again in God's way that they wanted to stay together, basically. Have you ever experienced that in your worship? You come together and you have a especially meaningful worship, and you don't want it to end. You just want it to go on and on. Or people that you especially appreciate, you want to just stay with them for a long time. Well, that's how they were feeling. So they extended this unleavened bread for another 7 days and stayed for 14 days. All right, and then there was a lot of things to reform, and Hezekiah was a reformer. Question 14, what became of the illegitimate altars in Jerusalem?
They were thrown down into the Kidron Valley.
They were thrown into the Kidron Valley. We see the Kidron Valley come up a lot. It's outside the walls of Jerusalem, and must have been their garbage dump. Because we see a lot of things that are disposed of in the Kidron Valley. So Hezekiah and the people take all these altars, and some of them had been placed there by his father Ahaz, and they took them out and threw them basically in the garbage dump. And then question 17 said, what reforms did Hezekiah initiate? I guess that's sort of the same question, isn't it? Because he removed the objects and the places for idol worship in Judah's cities. The one in question 14 seems to be limited to Jerusalem, but he basically did that in other cities in Judah also. So that he was trying to cleanse and remove these so that the worship of God could rightly take place. All right, question 18. What did Hezekiah do to reestablish daily worship?
And the priests and Levites.
He appointed the priests and the Levites to their positions of serving in the temple. And their positions primarily involved things like sacrifices and incense and that sort of thing. So his intent was to establish the full worship of God back centered on the temple as God had intended. And that's what he was trying to do.
I think it's important to also say that he did it as it was prescribed by God. It wasn't just he was trying to do it himself.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't had this in a long time, so let's just figure out a new way. It was the way God had set up.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that means that they still had somewhere those instructions from God.
And it also means that over time it didn't change.
Yeah, over time it didn't change. It's going to be interesting when we talk about Josiah, because during the reign of Josiah they find a book in the temple, which is interesting. This is just a few decades after Hezekiah, and they've lost it apparently for some reason, or it's become misplaced. I don't know. We'll talk about that a little more. All right, question 19. How was the worship supported?
Hezekiah gave some of it from his own property.
Yeah. But generally, what was God's plan for supporting the priests and Levites while they were dedicating themselves to serving in the temple? It was through tithing, through the 10%, and all of the people were subject to that. It's true that Hezekiah gave a lot of lambs and bulls for sacrifices, but for the daily support of the temple, that came from the tithes of the people. And as the temple had been closed, apparently that had stopped also. And so he reinstituted that and supported the worship in that way, which was God's plan, again, to Gary's point, doing it as God intended for it to be done. Then number 21, how were the priests supported? Well, I guess we just answered that, didn't we?
A certain amount was designated to them.
Yes. A certain amount of the sacrifices and also the tithes went to them for their support and help, and their families could partake of those things too. And again, that was God's plan, because you remember that when the people came into the land, what happened? How much land did the tribe of Levi get? They didn't get any. They got some cities here and there, but they didn't get any land because their support was going to come from the people who had the land paying their tithes. And that was God's plan.
I like in verse 10 where since the contributions had been brought to the house, we now have enough to eat and with some left over.
Yes.
And so, again, kind of doing it the Lord's way and allowing them to be able to do their work like they should. They're not having to support themselves in any other way, and there's enough to be.
If you do it the Lord's way, the principle is you'll have plenty and more. And that shows here, and it shows in other places. All right, now we have this invasion by Assyria. This was in the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. Now, if you remember, the northern kingdom fell in the 6th year, taken away. Samaria was besieged and conquered, and the Assyrians took away many of the people of the northern kingdom and brought other people in from some of their other provinces to populate the land. So this is 8 years later. The Assyrian king that captured Samaria and took away the northern king was a guy by the name of Shalmaneser. This invasion is another Assyrian king by the name of Sennacherib. And so that's what we're talking about here, and it's in the 14th year of his reign. 2 Kings 18 tells us that. Doesn't specifically say the timing here in Chronicles, but Kings tells us. So look at question 22. How did Hezekiah fortify Jerusalem against the Assyrians?
That falls, shot springs.
Okay, yeah, he repaired walls, stopped up the water sources,
Weapons.
and organized his military and gave them arms. So he was preparing for a siege or an attack by the Assyrians. And then question 23 says, why did Hezekiah think he could defeat the Assyrians? Yeah, let's read that in 32, 7 and 8. Chapter 32, 7 and 8. It says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. This is Hezekiah speaking to the people. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the horde that is with him, for there are more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and fight our battles. And the people took confidence from the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. So basically, Hezekiah says to the people, the Lord's on our side. He will fight for us. So it doesn't matter how many he's got. You just be strong and courageous. You be faithful to God, and God will fight for us. And so Hezekiah had that confidence, and according to what's said here, the people listened to him, and they had that confidence too, that they could resist the Assyrians. All right, 24. How did Sennacherib blaspheme?
They're saying God couldn't deliver Hezekiah.
Did he come and say that personally?
He sent letters.
He sent messengers and letters, basically. He didn't come and say that. But he basically compared God to other gods, to the idol gods, and what was his point? We've conquered all these nations and their gods. What makes you think, why would you listen to when he says, we and our God, and those were really not gods at all. But he's now dealing with the one that out. He's going to discover that and basically blaspheme. Kings tells us that when he gets this message from Sennacherib, he takes it to the altar and lies it before God and prays. And Chronicles doesn't give us that account, but that's what Hezekiah does. That's his reaction. And then 25 says, why did he address the people directly rather than through ambassadors?
Trying to scare them.
Yeah, he was playing mental warfare, wasn't he? He was trying to get them to get into the heads of the people. And so he spoke to the people. You remember, again, Kings gives us the account that Hezekiah's representative said to him, don't speak to us in the voice of the people. Speak to us in Aramaic because, we understand it. That was the language of diplomacy. And basically the representative of the king said, oh no, they're the ones I want to hear this. They're the ones I want to speak to. So they were trying to win without a battle. If you can do that, that's good tactic to win without a battle. All right, and then 26. How did Hezekiah defeat the Assyrians? I think this may be a trick question.
Praise to God.
Yeah. Did Hezekiah defeat the Assyrians? No. Who did?
Yeah.
God defeated the Assyrians because, again, We have the account in Kings that in one night God destroyed 185,000 Assyrians outside the walls of Jerusalem. And because of that, Sennacherib basically had to retreat. He'd lost his army, or the bulk of his army, so he retreated, went back to Assyria, where he was killed by his own sons, interestingly enough. And then they had to flee, and one of his other sons took the power from that time, the rulership of Assyria. All right, then we have this account of the sickness of Hezekiah. And question 27 says, how is Hezekiah healed of his disease?
He prayed to the Lord.
He prayed to God, and God healed him. Again, Kings gives us a little more information here. Isaiah comes to him, the prophet Isaiah, and tells him to apply this poultice or whatever. And as a result of that, he recovers from his sickness or from his illness. But I want you to look here at verse 25 of chapter 32, and it's an interesting wording I find in this verse. Well, let's read 24 also, just to get the context. In those days, Hezekiah became sick and was at the point of death. And he prayed to the Lord, and he answered him and gave him a sign. But Hezekiah did not make return according to the benefit done to him. What does that language mean? Did not make return.
Unthankful.
He was ungrateful. I think that's a good summary for it. Instead of being thankful that he had been rescued by God, he didn't show that in his actions and what he did as a result.
One version says his heart was proud.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that in just a minute as what happened afterwards. And then question 28 asks, what miraculous sign of healing was given to him?
Shadow goes back 10 steps.
Yeah, again, Kings has a bigger account of this than Chronicles does. And again, it's with Isaiah that he has this discussion, and Isaiah said to him, you can choose your sign. The shadow can go forward 10 steps, I can go backwards 10 steps. And Hezekiah says, well, the shadow always goes forward, so make it go back. In other words, turn time back by 10 steps. And that's what God does, to show that he had heard his prayer, and then his prayer was answered, and Hezekiah was healed. And then, although Hezekiah, like most of the good kings we've talked about, he wasn't completely good. He had his character flaws. As far as a king goes, he was very good. He was good for the nation. He was a good leader. He led in spiritual ways and reinstituted the worship of God. But this is a personal issue that he has here. In question 29, what sin did Hezekiah commit in showing his prosperity to the representatives from Babylon? Pride, and what was he proud of? His wealth and his power. Now, at this time, Babylon is looking for how to overthrow the Assyrian rule. By Hezekiah's actions, it may have put Judah on the to-be-conquered list by Babylon, because they saw, he showed them everything basically he had. And that's an indication of his pride. And then number 30 said, to what did the writer attribute his sin? Guess we've already answered that. He was proud, his pride. And then if you look at verses 26 and 27, you see the result. Consequences, rather. Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, both he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord did not come upon them in the days of Hezekiah. But what does that imply?
The wrath came later.
It is coming. It is coming. And it says, verse 27, Hezekiah had great riches and honor, and he made for himself treasuries for silver, for gold, for precious stone, for spices, for shields, and for all kinds of costly vessels, and then storehouses, etc., etc. So Hezekiah was a successful king and a prosperous king, and that caused him or led him into this idea here of pride.
It's interesting, verse 31 talks about when the envoys were sent by the rulers of Babylon to ask him about the miraculous sign that had occurred in the land. God left him to test him and know everything that was in his heart.
Okay.
So God allowed an opportunity for that pride to overtake him.
Yeah. And did he pass the test? No, he did not. Does God still operate in that way today? Are there things that come to us that may be tests today? Sure, and we should regard situations like that and think about what the right reaction will be. Sometimes we react rather than respond. So we need to think about it.
I think it's interesting at the very beginning of Hezekiah's the passage that's talking about him. It says that he did what was good and right in the eyes of God. It didn't say that he was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
So doing what's good and right, sometimes we may go through the actions and the motions, but the heart may not be right.
Yeah. But of course, the guy that's said about, the guy that's called a man after God's own heart, did he have his problems too? Mm-hmm. Yes, he did. Yeah. Again, sort of personal issues. As a king, David was a great king, but in his personal life, he sort of messed up. And Hezekiah seems to me to be a similar sort of person. As a king, he was a great king, led the people in good, restoring the temple, restoring the worship, all of those good things. But when it came to personal issues, and pride is a matter of the heart, he was not as good as he should be. And we found that throughout in these kings, even the ones that were smiley-faced kings. They had their own issues sometimes too. All right, we have a few minutes left. So Hezekiah's good reign was marred by pride. Is pride still a problem today? Yes. And what are some things that we can have pride in? Or in which we can have pride?
Your own riches.
Your own riches, okay. How wealthy you are.
Popularity.
All right, how popular you are. How many friends you've got. How many people you know.
Your abilities.
Your abilities.
Your accomplishments.
Your accomplishments. How pretty you are. Or, not all of us are, but there are many things. Can we have pride in how humble we are? we have to be very careful that even in doing good things, that we begin to pat ourselves on the back about the good things that we're doing, or the good things that we're accomplishing, or how people look at us. So
I think about the Pharisee in his prayer. He said, "Thank you, God, that I'm not like this sinner." That's straight pride. Yeah,
that is straight pride, and it's interesting. How can we resist pride?
Remember where all of our blessings came from.
All right, all of those things we just listed that we could have pride in, basically come from God, don't they? So that we don't have anything that we haven't been given. One way to look at it. Another thing we can do, and I think, Gary, your example of the proud Pharisee is a good one. What do we use as a standard for ourselves? What was he using as the standard? This other guy, who was a tax collector, basically. Who should we use as our standard?
Christ.
We should use Jesus. And if we use Jesus for our standard, we can never be proud, because we will not measure up. No matter what area of life you measure, we will not measure up. So be careful who you're comparing yourself with. You can always find somebody that's worse than you are. I say always. It makes it false by saying that, probably. But you can find people that are worse than you are, like the Pharisee did, and then puff yourself up. But that's not our standard. Our standard is Jesus. And so we should compare ourselves with Him and measure ourselves against Him, not against others. All right, for Sunday, look at 2 Chronicles 33 to 36, lesson 18. And as I said, in those 4 chapters there are 7 kings. So we're going to pass pretty quickly through these last kings of Judah. Some of them don't last very long, months and not years. So be prepared for that. And then next Wednesday, we will end our class with a review.
So when did Hezekiah build this tunnel?
When did he build a tunnel?
When did he build this?
Yeah, and that's a very famous, you can still see that tunnel today in Jerusalem. If you go to Jerusalem, Hezekiah's tunnel. He tunneled from the Gihon spring, or from the spring down to, what's the name of it? Pool of Siloam? Yeah, from the Gihon spring down to the Pool of Siloam. And he did that after the Assyrians were repelled from. So after the 185,000 had been killed and the Assyrians retreated, that's when he built the tunnel. And what he was doing, of course, was trying to assure that Jerusalem had a constant supply of water in case of a siege, because that was the Assyrians' intent, is they were going to besiege Jerusalem, which is eventually what the Babylonians did when they.
So he was preparing for that.
He was. I think he probably, I don't know. I don't know his mind, but he probably learned a lesson from the Assyrians coming, and said, "We've got to do something better." And that's a great engineering feat, that tunnel, because they started from either end, and somehow found each other in the middle, and that was in 600 BC or something like that. So a long time ago.
Also to prevent the enemy from having water.
Yes. Yeah, it was protected the water outside and brought it to the inside of the city. All right. You'll be quiet in the halls. You're dismissed. Thank you.
Well, the picture in the book doesn't look like anything.
No, it doesn't. You can't. It says there's an inscription there. I never could see an inscription on that. But if you Google Hezekiah's tunnel, you'll find some very interesting things about it on the internet.
Oh, really?
Okay, yeah. The first people we saw. No. Thank you. Oh, did you really? How's your shoulder? That's just funny. It is. Okay. I will now.
She's tried twice. It doesn't work.
Tell everybody about chiseling your name on the wall.
That's right. Watering everybody else. Thinking, you have to like Django, get off the bus and get your stuff. And you don't really know what it is you're doing. It would be great to understand your phone and your risk dropping it. And there is water sometimes trickling.
You have to have a waterproof.
But yeah, you need one of those Kodak underwater cameras.
Something that's like strapped to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we didn't have to. I'm gonna picture got the people got something coming out. Now it's good. But all these years I didn't know Hezekiah had a phone. Should we live on the church in Jerusalem? It's pretty cool.
See all that.
I still don't know how they.
I was like, well, maybe they just drove it straight along and laid it on the top of the grill and just tried to like. Maybe they got offline and they're like, no, we need to bring it back.